If you've ever seen the hit show Squid Games, you'll recognize pretty quickly that today's story and the show are very similar. On account of it being written and posted under the No Sleep subreddit, this story is most definitely fictional, but I still found it moving and a perfect representation of our society in its current state. I'll expand more on what I mean by that at the end of the video. Also, the story was quite long, so I will be paraphrasing, but if you'd like to read the whole post in its entirety, I will provide a link down below. And with that, let's get started. The opening monologue introduces our main character as digging in an unknown location and alluding to the fact that he is doing so by force, describing how his hands are completely torn apart by the shovel. He confirms this by saying his life is hanging in the balance, and the writer piques our interest by hinting that he's not alone. We find out our main character is a balding man in his mid-30s and he's in an exorbitant amount of debt. He describes his days as an analyst, going into detail about his struggles running in the hamster wheel every day, with seemingly no end in sight. He's quite obviously unhappy and misses the simplicity and innocence that life brought as a child. With nowhere else to run, he turns to the bottle, drinking his worries away until he hits a breaking point. He absolutely loses it one day in the office, throwing his computer and kicking over his rolling chair, barging into his boss's office screaming obscenities. At this point, we finally learn that our main character's name is Will. He storms out of the office, never to return again. Even though Will had dreamed of quitting for so long, he couldn't help but feel anxious and frustrated, and rightfully so. The coming months would prove to be the most grueling and challenging time of his life. He vomits as reality crashes down on him that he has just became a nobody. He worries not just how he lost his source of income, but also that he lost all the respect his job title gave him. When driving home, a little girl runs into the street. He swerves, rolling his car into the ditch. His car is totaled, but what's worse is that emergency responders find no sign of a girl ever being present, and later reveals that this was in fact a suicide attempt. After taking a trip to the hospital for a fractured foot and several lacerations on his arm, Will's debt rose into the 6 figures. Adding to his humiliation, he moved back in with his parents and into his bedroom that has since been turned into a sports room. After a month or two, his parents started giving him gentle nudges to move out. Nothing confrontational, but comments here and there, along with texts to job postings, things like that. But no matter how many places Will applied to, he never got a single call back. He started drinking more and more, until one day he received a text from an unknown number. "Is this William?" it read. It turned out to be Casey, an old friend from college. But they never had been good friends, and Casey was more on the periphery of the friend group, so Will was especially confused when he offered to meet at a bar with drinks on him. Will mulls it over and grows suspicious of how Casey got his number, but after a short, awkward interaction with his dad, he ultimately decides to go. Borrowing his dad's car, Will drives out to meet Casey and quickly realizes the bar is very run down. Casey pulls up in a slick Corvette, and the plot thickens. The pair go inside, and after some brief small talk, Casey reveals the true reason why he called on Will. "I get the feeling you're down on your luck." "What are you talking about?" says Will. "I work for an organization that's become interested in you. In fact, when your file came across my boss's desk, I knew we had a winner, a real company man. Are you offering me a job?" Casey doesn't give him a straight answer, but promises someone will be in contact within a week to set up a real interview. He then gives Will $500, and when he refuses, Casey merely says pride is a sin and leaves Will at the pub, baffled at what just happened. Will waited for the next week impatiently and told his parents that he finally set up a job interview, but as the days went by, that felt more and more like a lie. One day, laying in bed, the phone finally rings. Hello? There were mechanical sounds in the background, and then a robotic voice spoke. Gibson, Woods, Parish Avenue, North End, 6:30 a.m., Monday. It was an address, about an hour away, just outside of a nature reserve in Indiana. That night, Will's nerves got the better of him, most likely in bewilderment of the fact that this might be his first lucky break in months. Fast forward to Monday, and Will makes the hour drive to the nature reserve and shows up half an hour early with a neatly printed resume. But he would soon find out none of that would matter. As the morning sun crested over the trees, the distant roar of a diesel engine broke the silence, and next thing he knew, a school bus screeched to a halt before him. Except this was no ordinary school bus. The windows were pitch black, such that no one could see in or out, and what's worse is that when the sliding doors flew open, there was no driver. A robotic voice begins to speak. Candidate, William Burghardt. Welcome. This is his last chance not to get on the bus, and after brief hesitation, he hoists himself aboard. Waiting inside was a crowd of a couple dozen from all different races, ages, and builds. Will sits beside a pregnant woman who later changes the entire outlook of the group. Chatter breaks out amongst the group, and it turns out everyone has been offered a job, but no one knows what the job is, who they'd be working for, and where the robot driving the bus was taking them. With each stop, more and more people were packing the bus, until there were 3 people in every seat as well as people standing in the aisles. The bus finally came to a stop, and the robot instructed them to get off. The answer to all their questions waiting just outside the sliding doors. As they filed off the bus, Will stares in shock. They weren't brought downtown or to an office building or in fact any building at all. No, they were standing in the middle of a grassy field surrounded by trees. He quickly realizes that there are people everywhere dressed in military garb, eyes hidden by reflective sunglasses. Looking atop the bus, there was a bald man holding a bullhorn, and Casey, except in very formal attire. Turning around, Will sees Rectangle spray-painted on the grass, with a shovel lying within each shape. It's at this point that his legs begin to wobble, slowly realizing that this was no regular job interview. The bald man asks for everyone's phones to be placed in a bucket, and as a woman walks through the crowd with a wicker basket, Will asks her, "What's happening?" but receives no response. The bald man begins to speak. It takes a strong, determined person roughly a full workday to dig a grave. Mumbles broke out in the crowd. This was definitely not good, but what he did next made things infinitely more tense. He pulls a gun out of his pocket and continues. However, our studies conducted over recent trials shows that whenever a person is placed under extreme stress, they cut that time in half. Nervousness visibly began washing over the crowd, and Will immediately remembered the woman from the bus. He glanced over to her, and she was shifting uncomfortably in place, until she piped up saying, "I would like to withdraw my application." Almost like he was expecting it, the bald man begins to snake through the crowd, stopping in front of the woman. He rubs her belly and then said, "Honey, we wouldn't have hired you anyways," and without hesitation, shoots her at point-blank range. Will's eyes dart around at the guards, Casey, and the bald man, and all of them just stood there completely unfazed by what just happened, almost like they've seen it before, and that this was completely normal. A few of the candidates banded together shouting, "They can't catch us all!" as they started bolting towards the trees. A few seconds of machine gun fire was all that was needed to take care of that. They all fell and moved no more. The bald man even had the audacity to make a joke about how they weren't team players. The only thought running through Will's mind is that they were all going to die here in this field, but that wasn't necessarily true. The bald man wasn't through with them just yet. Casey yelled for them to dig, a hint of plea in his voice. Everyone ran to a shovel and began to dig profusely. No one knew what was going to come next. Will takes a moment to examine himself for injury, as he had blood all over his jacket sleeves. But he wasn't shot and immediately knew that it was blood spray from when the pregnant woman met her doom. There was only the sound of metal striking earth, with gunshots ringing out every so often, signaling that yet another has met their maker. Will takes a moment to look around, and among the fallen corpses were a few remaining candidates, but they were no longer human. It was almost as if in a state of primal fear, waking their animal side, where nothing else in the world existed except this one mission: to dig. The shovel handle explodes in Will's hand, sending splinters into his arm, and as he screams in pain, a guard walks up to the grave, rifle in hand. He continues to dig with his hands until his nails completely fell off, and eventually he found what broke the shovel. It was a large stone embedded in the earth, and Will eventually mustered the strength to dislodge it, tossing it over the edge of the grave. Just when he thought he couldn't dig any more, he felt a tug on his shirt, and fingers dug into his armpits as he felt his feet lift off the ground. 2 guards lifted him out of the pit, with one of them raising their rifle, and tears began to stream down Will's face as he anticipated the inevitable. Then he heard a voice. "William, is it?" And he opened his eyes, seeing that the bald man had hunched down before him. He placed his hands on either side of Will's head, touching his forehead with his own, and asked, "Would you dig another?" He started shaking uncontrollably and crying profusely, and without even knowing, nodded his head, saying, Yes, I'll do it. I'll dig you as many as you need." He kissed Will's forehead. "Essential," he said. Then he ran a pocket knife down the side of Will's face, but he was too exhausted and didn't have the strength to recoil. The soldiers hoisted him to his feet and led him onto the bus, and there were only 5 other people left. They all had the same empty, sad stare on their faces, but more importantly, each candidate bore a slice down their cheek, marking them for what they were: essential. As the bus left, Will sees a bulldozer filling in the graves they'd thrown the corpses into. The ride home was long, quiet, and empty. After reading this story 3 times, I'm still not entirely sure what to make of it. It's a very deep story that can be interpreted in many different ways, but I think this story puts the cutthroat nature in our society on full display. In the book Death of a Salesman, Willie says, "A man is not a piece of fruit. You can't just eat the flesh and throw away the peel." Granted, this has always been the case in society to a certain degree, but in recent years, it's definitely become so much more of a problem. We see this with cancel culture, where genuine good people can be socially annihilated because they no longer act in accordance with the narrative. So in short, I think this story is a warning. By illustrating the absolute worst case scenario if we continue viewing humans as expendable pawns only to be used for selfish gain. But that's just my interpretation. If you think you have a better one, I'd love to hear it down in the comments below. And with that, I'll see you all in the next video.